Welcome to the Accidental Experts podcast. I'm your host, Bryce Hamilton. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a child and family therapist. I have been in practice for over 15 years, and I'm also a mom of 4. So I know the challenges both professionally and personally. I'm so glad that you're here today to grow your parenting toolbox. Please come as you are and be ready to learn. My goal is to make you the accidental expert so that you can raise healthy humans. Hi, guys. Welcome back. We're so glad that you're here today. I hope that you're enjoying our episodes. Today, we're going to talk to Lisa Ruff. She is a clinical social worker, and she is in private practice and sees children, teens, and adults servicing lots of topics, but she primarily focuses on anxiety, depression, ADHD, and giftedness. And today she's going to talk to us about highly sensitive children, what that is, what we need to know about it. But she has over 27 years of experience working with this population of kiddos and adults. And she's going to give us some tips and tricks on how to navigate that as a parent. So welcome, Lisa. We're so glad that you're here.
Hello. Hello.
Yes. Welcome. So we're going to be talking about high sensitivity, like a highly sensitive child today, and how to recognize that. So let's start with talking about what is a highly sensitive child, or sometimes they're called an HSC. What is that?
Yeah, that is a kid who really feels their feelings. Like it is zingy inside. They tend to have a harder time with transitions, kind of be tuned into all the things going on, noise, the sensory experience. They tend to need downtime after being at school all day or away from home. They get more easily overwhelmed. You might notice that if you have 4 kids and one of your kids is highly sensitive, that, your other 3 kids are fine running around at the zoo and your one kid needs some downtime and to sit on the bench by themselves for a bit.
Or they might be clinging to you too. Sometimes they're not separating.
For sure, clinginess is absolutely a part of being a highly sensitive kid, or can be a part.
Yeah. I mean, and I think, as we're going through all these different episodes, I like to clarify that every kid is so different, right? And so being highly sensitive, yes, we're looking for certain markers or traits in a particular kiddo to say yes, they're kind of moving towards this direction, but right. Every kid looks so different. So at my house, when I became familiar with highly sensitive, I was it started with one of my younger daughters, and I was there is something here. There's so much big feelings, and I'm this is a lot. And then as I started digging into it, I was oh my gosh, I think we might be a whole house of highly sensitive people. Yeah. So yes. Yeah. So it's a lot. Therapist. I know, right? Yes, we're discovering all these things, and so I think they can be overwhelmed so easily. They can, the overstimulation piece, or the big feelings of something happens, you correct them, and then there's automatically tears, that part of very sensitive to our feelings, or they're you're mad at me, and I'm I'm not mad at you. I just said you can't, jump with your brother on the trampoline because I don't want either of you to break your arms. And that is crying, right? So it's lots of deep feelings of things.
Right. Really feeling it to their core.
Yes. Right. And so that can be really hard for parents, especially if you're not highly sensitive, or sometimes if we are, because we're having our big feelings and they're having their big feelings. And so we can trigger each other too. I noticed that they also don't, like you said, sensory stuff, but it's clothing, right? Particular about that, or change in seasons. I'm wearing long sleeves and now I have short sleeves. It's why doesn't my sleeve come all the way down to my wrist? But it's they're hot. And it's it's that hard part of navigating those transitions can be really hard. But then once they're adjusted, it's okay, we're good. We can vibe here.
Right. And scents, if you're at the store by the perfume counter, scents can be overwhelming, or food textures. Sometimes I'll find that kids who are highly sensitive are pickier eaters.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny that you say about the smell thing, because that is so true. Like one of the things that they have in the questionnaire that we'll include in the show notes is sensitive to smells. And one of my kids, the one that I was talking about earlier, she is my poop diaper detector. Like if there is a poopy diaper, she knows it before anybody else. So sometimes I'll be like, hey, does your brother have a poopy diaper? And she'll be like, I can't smell anything. And I'm like, okay, good. Or she'll be like, he needs to be changed, right? Like, cause sometimes he's secretive about it because he's two. And so, yeah, I mean, it's crazy how highly sensitive she is to that particular thing. But also pain, right? They seem to be very responsive to pain too, of like they get hurt, like they fall and your other kid, you're like, okay, brush it off. Like we're good. Like just keep going. And it's like, I need a Band-Aid. Like, and you're like, there's no blood. And they're like, I need a Band-Aid, right? Like, or it still hurts, or there's still, yes, lots of tears, right? And you're like, okay, this seems like a little situation, but for them, it's feeling so big. Yeah. So those are all like the qualities, and there's a lot of them, and we have to meet certain like several, right, to be able to say we're a highly sensitive child or person. But it's a lot of these things all together at the same time. So what's the difference between someone who is highly sensitive and not? Like, how would you answer that question?
Yeah. I think the traits we just mentioned, right? Kids having those traits, being deeply feeling, crying, more sensitive to things. You might notice that someone who is highly sensitive is really deeply empathic and has such good emotional attunement to others. Maybe goes to school and notices how the teacher's feeling in the classroom when most of the kids aren't noticing, like, oh, quieter today, or seems more sad. Oftentimes, kids who are highly sensitive will seem, older, right? Because of that emotional attunement.
Yeah, they seem wise beyond their years. Yeah, like an old soul. Sometimes we would label those kids that way too.
Old soul for sure.
Yeah. And also, like, I think it's funny, like, you have a big surprise as a parent that you're excited about, like, we're getting a pet, or we're going on a trip, or we're going to move. And it seems like such a fun, exciting thing. And the kid is like devastated by this. Eventually they come around to it, but the surprise part is not good for them. They just do not like that piece. Whereas, like, maybe a kid that is not highly sensitive might be like, oh, that seems scary. And then, transitions more quickly.
Absolutely. That's such a good point. Those surprises can be tricky for highly sensitive kids.
Yes.
Send them into overwhelm.
So as we're listening to this, like parents might be like, oh my gosh, all of my kids are, or none of my kids are. What are we thinking about in terms of how much of this is in our population? Like, how often is this occurring, do you think?
Yeah, well, I've seen some different statistics, anywhere from 15 to 30%. So, and we know it's a personality trait, right? It's not something that is a diagnosis.
Yeah. So it's more of just qualities, right? That we're putting together to say this is highly sensitive, but it's not in our profession. We use a thing called a DSM, and it's our diagnosing manual. It's not something that's showing up in that place.
Right.
And so it's more of just a way of being, but we still have to navigate it like a thing that's important to label so that we can figure out how to help support our kids that are highly sensitive.
Right. It is just deeper understanding for sure.
Yeah. Sometimes I have people say, is an HSP or an HSC just autism with a different name? What do you say to that?
No.
Yeah.
I would say it's not. I think, like I was saying before, it is a personality trait. So anybody could have it, regardless of having a diagnosis from the DSM or not.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of crossover there. One of my specialties is working with gifted kids, and there are a lot of gifted kids who are highly sensitive.
Yeah.
And so, there's an area where you might think like, oh, all gifted kids are highly sensitive. Well, no, a lot of them are, but not all of them.
Yeah. And I don't know of any studies that are specifically looking at intelligence and also like emotional intelligence at the same time in relation to kids. I don't have any studies on that, but I agree with you. I think it is higher among that population than maybe just people that have average intelligence, but then at the same time, it's like, I see those too. So there's a lot of mix in this. And so it can be your kid just meeting these qualities, or even if they don't quite meet all the qualities, like you still may have to do things as a parent to kind of respond to their personality type. So how do you identify if your child or you as a parent are highly sensitive? What do you think is the strategy there?
Yeah. Well, there is luckily a test you can take online
Yeah.
to determine whether or not you are highly sensitive or whether your kiddo is highly sensitive. And we'll have that information available for everyone so they can take a look at it. But, it has things on there like other people's moods affect me, or I find myself needing to withdraw on busy days, getting rattled when there's a lot of things to do.
Yeah. Or like tons of noise, like kind of like being overwhelmed, like overstimulated. Yeah, totally. Yeah. So we'll include that, like Lisa said, in the show notes so that you can take it for yourself or your kid. And then that kind of gives you more of a definitive answer as to whether this type of personality trait applies to you or your kid. So what's your advice for parenting a kid that's an HSC? So let's say we take the inventory and we now can say, without a doubt, yes, this makes sense for my child. So how do we parent this type of personality trait, maybe different than a kid who's not?
Mm-hmm. Well, I have a million ideas, but I won't all of them today. But so just kind of starting out thinking about, highly sensitive kids don't love feeling rushed, right? And those transitions can be harder. So even thinking about, what's happening for them when they're getting up in the morning, sometimes that can be a really tricky time. And that's oftentimes what brings people into my office, right? They've got a highly sensitive child who doesn't want to detach from mom or dad, doesn't want to be rushed, all the things that go along with that. So one of the things I love to do is help parents set up some I love you rituals. And
tell us about that. What is that?
Yeah, Becky Bailey wrote a book called I Love You Rituals. And they are little rituals that help you stay connected with your kid. And they're kind of those anchors in your day that create safety and help with transition. So it does a lot of good things all at once. So I love having an I love you ritual in the morning for a parent. Like maybe you wake your kid up with kisses or a song. And then before you take them in the car to school, you might say, I'm going to fill you up with love, right? Like I'm going to power you up with love. And if you have a kid who will eventually get filled up, you might say, okay, I'm going to give you a hug. I'm filling you up with love. Oh, is that enough? Like, oh, yeah, it is. And you can move on, or they might need more. But if you have a kid who is in need of a lot and a lot and a lot of hugs, then you would just want to give them a certain amount.
Yeah. So set it ahead of time. Yeah.
Throughout the day. Yeah.
I love that. So just little ways to, one, let them know that we love them, but also to help us stay connected through the busy moments of our busy lives.
Yes. Yes. And having those, maybe after school and at bedtime also. Most people already naturally have an I love you ritual at bedtime.
Yeah, but it's adding those ones of like how you being conscious of how we're waking people up. I mean, I think that's great for any kid, but especially a kid that's highly sensitive because of those transitions being difficult. That makes sense. What other thoughts do you have on ideas for parents?
Yeah. I think that, letting them know that you believe them whenever they are feeling overwhelmed, right? Because I don't have to agree with the feelings. Like you were saying in your house, how things happen when you think, oh gosh, that wasn't that big of a deal, right? But just saying, I believe you, your knee really does hurt. Or I believe you, that was really hard. Just letting your kid know you are with them, you see them, just that I believe before anything can be so powerful for that connection.
Yeah, because it's supporting that relationship, but then also helping them to validate their feelings because they're feeling it. Even if we're not feeling it too, it's a really big feeling and we don't want them to start dismissing or discounting how they feel.
Right. And I think it can be tricky as a parent because we're trying to like get the kids to school or, get to soccer practice, get dinner
Mhm.
on the table. So to take a moment and be present with your kiddo and say
Mhm.
that is so powerful.
Yeah. And I think for me, I remind myself all the time of like what my intentions are as a parent. Like in the morning when I wake up, I kind of like say different things to myself about like what I want that day to be like. But what I've noticed is that when I do take those moments to do these things, like saying, I believe you, even though I might be like, that wasn't a big deal. Like, you're totally fine. Get up. Let's move on.
Yeah.
It is big. And so by doing that, then I actually control the meltdown a little bit. Like it doesn't have to go on so long sometimes because they
Right.
get what they're needing to be filled up. And so
Right.
then by being like, I believe your knee hurts so bad. Can I get you an ice pack? Could I get you a Band-Aid? Could I get you some snuggles? Right. And then we're able to like move forward in whatever the supportive things are. And then we don't stay stuck in that. And I think as a parent for myself, that's when it gets upsetting is like when we stay stuck. And sometimes we do. I mean,
Right.
that's parenting. Sometimes we stay stuck and we don't know what the solution is yet,
Right.
but that helps. So that's great advice to do
Mhm.
the I believe because I think they have such big feelings. And a lot of people, especially in the school system, maybe don't think that being highly sensitive is so awesome because it can take time from where they're wanting to go, like teachers or administrators, or, like it feels like maybe it's consuming. And so I'm always telling parents to like advocate for this of saying like, hey, if we did it like this, it might actually solve this problem faster. So we're not having a problem that we're dealing with for so long that we just validate, like, you do feel like I wasn't listening to you, or I believe that that feels real for you.
Mhm.
And that's hard, I think, in that world too. So not just for parenting, but also for where our kids spend most of their time in school.
Yeah, yeah. To meet the needs of all those kids is hard. And to take
So
the
hard.
time out for someone who doesn't like to be rushed and who gets easily overwhelmed really is restructuring your interventions in your day.
Yeah, it can be really hard and exhausting for them too. So we're kind of talking about overstimulation too. So like managing that piece is important, not just with the transitions, but like if it's going to be loud someplace, or do you have any advices or thoughts on that?
Yeah. So, remembering that those kids need more downtime, right? So building that into the day. I think places where it's going to be loud or overstimulating, one thing we can do is take away the surprise, prepare
Mhm.
them for it, right?
Yeah.
So just talking about it ahead of time or maybe taking out the stuffed animals or Legos and kind of playing out what's going to happen later in the day. If you're going to the trampoline park and it's in a gym that's super noisy and there's a lot of kids, acting that out, talking about what that might feel like. Then we have a touchstone for the kiddo to connect with. And I think it's an option with when you're there to have a space where they can go and sit with you and be calm. Some people do like to use headphones or earplugs, depending on where your kiddo's sensitivity lies.
Yeah, that's great advice. Prepare, and both you, like with the earplugs, if that's necessary, and your kid for that endeavor. What other parenting thoughts do you have?
Yeah, we don't want our kids to be alone in their feelings. We don't want any kid, highly sensitive or not, to be alone in their feelings, but especially those highly sensitive kiddos. We want to make sure that they're feeling felt. So that means when they start to go up that stress spiral because they're feeling overwhelmed by something, that we've got to really first take that deep breath and anchor ourselves to be the sturdy leader,
Mhm.
right? Do some grounding and then maybe offer some empathy, whether that is with words or for some highly sensitive children, too many words can be not great. So it might
Mhm.
just be a look and a, right, a deep breath,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Oh gosh, buddy, you feel overwhelmed. And just sitting with them,
Hmm.
identifying that, letting them feel seen. And you can attest to this because you have a highly sensitive kid in your family, but that you could sit in that feeling for a long time, or it might be a shorter time depending on how your kid is wired.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll ask, like, are you ready to come back? Or, how are you feeling about this? And sometimes I say, is it okay if you are here? Like, I need to go do something. There's another need that's happening. Would it be okay if you sat here with another sibling or with your stuffy or something to kind of like let me know when you're ready to come back? And sometimes I get a yes, sometimes I get a no, right? But we're communicating, which I think is so important, and being curious about how to help them transition through.
Right. And what I love about that is, when we're talking to kids and reflecting, empathizing, we're not punishing. We're looking at skill development. We're not looking at consequences, right? We want them to feel connected and we want them to have some skill building. So they're learning how to emotionally regulate and get those feelings contained so they can transition on.
Yeah, because eventually they're going to become adults, right? And the goal as parents is also to train them for that part. And so feeling bad about your feelings oftentimes has people shutting them off, which is not necessarily a healthy adult skill, right? Sometimes we have to compartmentalize, but it's not generally a good skill for us when we could feel the feelings and navigate through the situation. So we have to teach them how to handle that so that we can go through it.
Right. And just being there with them, we're helping them contain it, right? We're the emotional anchor. We're letting them know all those feelings are okay. You are safe. We'll get through this.
Yeah, I can handle it.
Presence. Yes. Yes. And, oftentimes I think parents can feel, and I know I felt this in my parenting years too, like, am I doing enough? Is, he's really upset or she's really upset. But we don't have to fix the overwhelm they're having. We just need to be there. Right. I love Dr. Becky talks about, be the potted plant when these things happen. So you're there, you're there with your kiddo, but you don't have to say anything. You can just be that physical presence.
Yeah. That takes the pressure off a little bit to have to solve it. Right. Because sometimes I don't know how to solve it.
Right. Right.
Yeah. And sometimes I think I do, but they're not ready. So like sitting there and letting us get to the place where they're regulated again is helpful for me as a parent, right? And that's something I talk about in my practice too. And I think something else about parenting this type of child is also that they may have a lot of hesitations about doing certain things. They might be, one of the questions says like, thinks about how high it is before climbing. And I think that part of being aware can look like some anxiety, right? And sometimes it really is clinical anxiety. Sometimes it's just they're anxious in new settings or particular things, but honoring their hesitation and being curious about that part of like, help me to understand what's happening here. Like you were so excited to start first grade, but now we're having a hard time. Like, what is going on for you?
Yeah. And I love, help me understand is one of my favorite phrases. So I love that one too. And I love getting lovingly curious. And I think for those transitions or things that might feel scary or something that's new, I love working with my clients on figuring out how to have a touchstone for that ahead of time. So if it's a new school, let's look up pictures online of the new school and let's look at the teacher's bio on the website and let's drive to the playground over the summer and play on the playground and walk the perimeter. So they aren't coming up with this scary thing in their head. They have a picture that can come up in their head of what it might be like.
Yeah. And then it feels real. They have a piece of that experience already, right? Sometimes you can't, if it's like a whole new state, it might be like, we don't get there before we're going to be there, right? Like maybe it's a vacation. Yeah. So I mean, it's just like looking up pictures online, and thankfully we have the internet now, so we can do those kind of things to help our kids prepare. So that's amazing. Like all of these things, I know that we could probably go on forever about these skills that we can do with our kids, but these are a really good introduction to the things that we can be conscious of when raising a highly sensitive child. So what do you want parents to take away from this conversation today?
Mm-hmm. That relationship is key. That connection is the foundation of everything, right? So, just being present with your kiddo, I believe you, validating their feelings,
Mhm.
all those things that feel so little are really so big.
Yeah, because eventually they become teenagers and parents will sometimes say to me, like, how do I get my teen to talk to me? And I'm like, well, we can work on that now, but like the ideal place that we're starting is when they're little, right? And being in those moments of like we may feel differently about something, but we're validating their feelings, not dismissing them, but we can have a different feeling. We don't have to own their feeling. And
Right.
that creates such a healthy long-term relationship.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I so appreciate all of your thoughts today, Lisa. This is lovely. And I know that so many families are going to benefit from this information. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Lisa. That was great information. I don't know about you, but I definitely have a highly sensitive kid at home. Well, four of them. And I think it's good for me to get this reminder of what highly sensitive looks like and how to navigate them. I think as a parent, like Lisa said, our jobs are to advocate for them, right? Helping people to understand where they're coming from, educating ourselves and our children, and also having empathy, right? To be able to meet those intense feelings that they may have and sensitivities to life. And with that, I will say thank you so much for showing up today to grow your parenting toolbox. We're so glad that you are here. We will look forward to seeing you next week. In the meantime, please subscribe to our show, share it with your friends, follow us on Instagram and Facebook, and check out our videos on YouTube. And if you have suggestions for future episodes, we would love to hear them. Our email is accidentalexperts@gmail.com. Thanks and have a great day. Some words from our legal team.
The information presented in this podcast is not intended or implied to be a substitute for appropriate professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. All content, including text, graphics, images, and information contained on or available through this podcast, is for general information purposes only. This podcast makes no representations and assumes no responsibility for the accuracy or information on or available through this podcast, and such information is subject to change without notice. You are encouraged to confirm any information obtained through this program with other sources and review all information regarding any condition or treatment with the appropriate professionals.
What we're saying is, yes, I am a real therapist, but I'm not your therapist.